Today on Remington's Inside the Industry, I'm going to be talking to Erica Tergeson, the new Government Affairs Director for DSC. Our sport of hunting has long been debated in the court of public opinion, but to survive into the future, we must be able to fight and win in the court systems of both our states and our nation's capital. Erica is a hunter, a shooter, and one of the most effective and respected advocates in Washington, D.C., speaking on behalf of sportsmen and the proud heritage, the American hunter and conservationist. And, as you're about to find out, we're lucky to have her fighting on our side.
This podcast is brought to you by Remington Firearms. For more information on the new era of Remington, visit our site at remarms.com.
Erica, welcome, and thanks for joining us today. I really appreciate you taking the time for this visit.
Thanks so much for having me. Great to be on.
Yeah, my pleasure. I think we've got a lot of interesting things to talk about, and I think that especially at this kind of time in the hunting industry, the hunting and shooting sports industry, so I think we got some cool things to talk about. Tell me, how did you get started in government affairs? You know, what's your background, and and how do you hang out with those politicians? That's something that I think it takes a special person to do.
That's a great question, but just like the U.S. population, there are a lot of decent politicians in Washington, D.C., but unfortunately, we don't hear about those. We hear about all of the bad ones. But I grew up from a ranching family, grew up in northern Colorado. I went to Colorado State, and I had volunteered for a local congressman. My family, because we're in farming and ranching, like a lot of people in your audience will understand, a lot of the actions of the federal government or the Congress have a profound impact on your family, whether you like it or not, and whether it's, energy prices like we see today, or taxes, or whatever it may be. I was always attuned to politics. We always talked about it at home, at the dinner table. So I always liked politics. So when I graduated, I went and worked for my local congressman in Washington, D.C. for a year. I thought I'd be there a year and then I'd move home to Colorado, and I just ended up loving it. I was working on natural resources issues, wildlife and other issues, which I loved. So I just ended up staying in DC, and I've been working on those issues ever since. And, it's nice for me to get home and to get out of DC, but I'm passionate about the issues, and that's why I still like being in DC and working on them. But it does get old. And if I had to live in the city all the time, there's just no way I could do it.
I get that. It's interesting. One of the things you mentioned, when you were introducing yourself a little bit or talking about your past, is when things affect other people. I've had this conversation with many people over and over and over again. If you look at, and I don't think this is the platform to beat on our current executive and our current government, but what the hell, I'll beat on them a little bit anyway. The reality is that whether you are a Democrat or Republican, most people don't really think things through and pay much attention because many things have zero effect on them. Right. From a personal standpoint, because you talked about the energy. Well, I come from an energy and a ranching family as well. And I've seen time after time when things have an effect on people individually, that's when they start paying attention. And up until now, I've been in the States for, I think, 20 years. I haven't really seen too many things happen that affected people in such a profound way as things are today. So even a pretty staunch Democrat, somebody that voted Democratic, always has voted Democratic, now they're paying just an outrageous price at the gas pumps. They're paying outrageous prices for everything, for rent, right, for heating, etc.
Right.
And that's when people start paying attention and say, shit, I really fucked up. Excuse my language. You know,
Right.
and I'm
No,
going to pay attention to what I'm going to pay attention a lot more to who I vote for and what I vote for next year, or at the,
right.
you know, whether it's to be the midterms or the 2 years from now.
Yeah, I mean, the number one indicator of what's going to happen in an election is gas prices. So if you look at that now, we're definitely in for a very likely change in November because people are not happy. And that's because, as we all know, gas prices impact pretty much everybody. And it's not just the cost of everything else going up as a result, but it is, like you said, if you want actual personal knowledge, when you go to the tank, which most Americans do, and you fill it up and you see how much it costs, it's pretty hard not to get upset about that.
Well, that's true. But then the other thing is that people have not really talked about. And again, I don't mean to go off on this tangent about our economy, but the one thing people haven't really talked about or thought about is this big change in gas prices is during the summer, spring and summer.
Hmm.
What's going to happen during the winter? Yeah, the
Yeah.
pump prices may stay the same, but people are going to be paying twice or three times as much to heat their homes. They just can't
Yeah.
afford it. That's all there is to it. So anyhow,
Yeah.
but talking about things that affect people individually, I think that the current look, I've got a lot of things that maybe I shouldn't say on a program like this, but I don't mind sometimes. You know, the importation of you know, and I hate to use the name trophies because I freaking hate that name.
Yeah, I do too.
Yeah, it's something I've always, ever since I've been involved with the shooting sports industry. I'm a hunter. I'm an avid hunter. My freezer's full of meat, and I hunt for meat. If I happen to get a great
Exactly.
bull, okay, fine. But
Yeah.
but I think, unfortunately, what happens in most instances, people that are non-hunters, if they hear the word trophy, they automatically think, oh, they just kill something, chop the head off, take the horns, and they're done. And it's
So
just
true.
so ludicrous. But I have a real problem with the government thinking they should control what other sovereign nations say it's okay to do. In Canada, Canada is one of the best nations, I think, in the world in controlling their you know, wild animal population and making it grow, et cetera, et cetera. And it's perfectly okay to hunt polar bears there, but you can't bring them into the United States. Give me a freaking break here.
I know, it's ludicrous. It makes no sense. And you know, that's, I think, when we're talking about Africa, for example, or other developing nations, I think it's easier for Americans that have some sort of connection with nature to understand maybe what Africans are going through, for example, right? Because if you look at what's actually happening in Africa, especially with like lions and elephants, for example, I mean, can we imagine as an American going to bed at night and having to worry about a lion attacking you or your family or your livestock that is your livelihood? And we just would not allow that to happen in the United States, right? And it's the same is true with elephants when they go in and take out a village or a crop or whatever it may be. So we then judge Africa based on, you know, what they want to do to remedy the problem and this is all, you know, in Africa, it's all based on science. It's all based on biological necessity. It's not willy-nilly management of wildlife over there. So it's amazing to me how Americans can take a quick glance at Africa and just say they shouldn't hunt their wildlife, yet look what we live in here and what a nice life we have here. And we don't have to worry, for the most part, about being threatened by wildlife here. So you can't look at Africa through an American lens. And unless you've been there, you really have no idea what it's like to live over there. And I think that's one of the biggest problems.
Well, that's true. That's 100% accurate. But even if you have been there, depending on where you've been, you won't notice it. If you've been in one of the high-end safari camps in Botswana, you won't freaking notice anything. You know?
That's true. You're right. You can
Yeah.
go to Africa and completely avoid, seeing what 99% of it is like if you want to.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Well, and isn't that where non-hunting safari camera people go? They don't go into the real Africa that we know.
Mm-hmm.
They go into these beautiful camps where everything is safe and cozy and nice, and just the thought of a wild animal or a herd of elephant. I mean, the herd of elephants, as we well know, they can come through a village and destroy their food for an entire year.
Yeah,
in
exactly.
in a matter of hours.
Although, at least if you've been to Africa, you've seen, the power of the animals and the wildlife and how destructive and threatening they can be. You at least have some sort of frame of reference
Right.
versus living here
But
never going to Africa.
But even with that, and the people in North America or in the United States are saying, well, isn't that cute? Gee whiz, you shouldn't do that. But even with the African nations allowing hunting and conservation being as strong as it is, etc., even with all that, what appears to be killing, their game animals have grown. How does that work?
Mm-hmm.
The population of game animals there has not declined. It's grown.
Right.
And so I think I would argue the fact that more than anything, these villages, they're not trying to kill them all. They're trying to move them someplace else so that they can live in reasonable safety.
Right. Right. And the numbers don't lie.
No.
I mean, the numbers are very clear out there. And that's why it's so frustrating, I think, for Dallas Safari Club, for us, because we see the numbers, we believe in scientific wildlife management, and yet in places like Washington, D.C., sometimes with certain politicians, that doesn't seem to matter, and if we start making all of our wildlife management decisions based on emotions, we're in really big trouble. We have this beautiful North American model that has worked so well. For example, in 1930, we had 300,000 white-tailed deer population. Now we have over 30 million.
Yep.
It's been incredibly successful. So why we would now stray from that and instead base our decisions off of emotions rather than how we know, wildlife works, how the ecosystems work, those type of things. It's very disturbing, and we are headed in a different direction.
Do you find that the politicians and the people that are making these decisions, do you find that they are really making far more emotional decisions than they previously did? And is that by party or is that overall?
Well, I would put people into certain categories. I would say in DC you have the 10% that it doesn't matter what argument you give them or what the numbers are, they don't care. They're just going to be with the, extreme animal rights folks every step of the way. And then you have folks in the middle, which is where more of the members of Congress actually reside. And if you explain the numbers to them, if you explain that, for example, IUCN has recognized how important sport hunted trophy hunting abroad is to the industry, is to wildlife conservation. It's essential for wildlife conservation, as we all know, outside of a lot of the photographic parks. When you can explain that to them in numbers, a lot of them will look at it and say, okay, maybe I need to think about this, and maybe I need to have a different position. But it takes a politician that's brave to do that, right? Because they know that they're going to have the animal rights extremists come after them. They're going to do what they're going to do. But you've got to meet the other ones in the middle and try to find some common ground.
The ones that are absolutely not willing, do they think for a second about their their state or their constituents, what their constituents might think. I found more and more and more over the last number of years that these people don't give a shit what their constituents think. They just have their agenda, and that's all they give a shit about.
Well, I don't think that's necessarily true, actually. I disagree with you on that.
You think AOC cares about what her constituents think?
Well, her constituents, I think, for the most part, are with her. That's why she's elected.
Well, I think we could argue that because the small amount of people that came out to elect her was like 1% of the voting population in that place. So
sure, but at the end of the day, there's not a lot of hunters probably in AOC's district, or people that were brought up on ranches. I'm just saying, for example. Okay. So they're going to have a completely different background than we are, and a completely different way of looking at this. So I do think politicians care to a certain extent what their constituents care about, because that's how they get reelected. And that's the number one goal of a politician, right? Is to get reelected.
Oh, really? I never knew that.
But I do think you're right. There are some elected officials that have maybe such a base of folks that will vote for them no matter what, that they don't care as much what certain constituents say. But it's still incumbent upon us to try to make them care.
Yeah, look, I'm you're kind of preaching to the choir. I agree completely with you. I guess I have some real concerns that we'll be able to do that. I think there's no question in my mind that in the last 5 years, or 7 years, our whole political framework and system and people and what their beliefs are has changed substantially. Beg your pardon? Oh, okay. Have I still got you?
Yep.
Okay.
I'm still here.
I think it's just changed substantially, and so I'm really concerned with how we're going to do this, if we're going to be able to do it, if we're able to get the support that we need to do it properly, and above and beyond how it is that people like nobodies like me can actually make a difference.
I'm actually a little more optimistic than you, especially right now. I feel like the tides have turned a little bit, especially like if we're talking about wildlife in Africa. We've had a number of groups that have come out, like I said, IUCN and Society for Conservation Biology, and have stated how important hunting is for the communities in rural Africa, for giving wildlife value, that type of thing. And I do feel like the word is starting to get out, that this is incredibly important and that we need to basically save hunting in a lot of these areas, because without it, we know that the wildlife will not exist. So I feel like we're turning the tide a little bit that way. Now, yes, we're in a completely different political climate and kind of post-COVID. I think everybody's still trying to figure out how things are going to work in DC. It's challenging for me on a day-to-day basis because, at one point in time, you used to be able just to walk into the House of Representatives and you could walk around and meet with people, stop by their offices. It's opened up a little bit, but for the past 2 years, it was basically shut down and you couldn't get into the office buildings unless you had a specific meeting, and then you had to go through security. And we're talking about our elected officials. This is something that every American should be able to access, and you couldn't access it. And then if you want to meet with the Fish and Wildlife Service, for example, to talk about some of these issues, it's all over Zoom. It can't be in person. And so I think that a lot is lost that way, and it's harder to create a relationship with somebody over Zoom or over the phone. So that is a different environment. But I do feel like some of the science is finally starting to make its way into the press, and we're seeing some of this finally recognized.
I hope so. But the one thing, though, that we kind of haven't touched on, we've been talking about conservation and et cetera, et cetera. But the one thing that we haven't even discussed is that if these bills were to come to fruition and pass, and there was no more importation of certain animals, then the hunters stop going there. And what happens to these villages that have such a tremendous they need hunters. They need us spending the money, not just spending the money. Look, if you take an elephant, for instance, or I don't care what it is, it feeds that entire village. They don't understand that, that an elephant will be nothing but a carcass of an elephant. If you show up in a village, will be nothing but a greasy spot on the ground in a matter of hours, because everybody is taking the meat.
Mm-hmm.
And what happens with that?
Right, but that's on us too, because we haven't explained what actually happens, and we need to do a better job of explaining that. I mean, if you look at, hunting for meat in the United States, if you look at the polling and the focus group numbers on that, it's a huge amount of Americans that support hunting for meat. Americans completely get that. Now, if you look at hunting for a trophy, that amount of support goes way, way down. So we need to do a better job of explaining what it is that we're doing abroad, which, we haven't done in the past. But going back to kind of what you were talking about, if, you can't bring home whatever you've harvested abroad, I think the perfect example is Kenya. I mean, look at Kenya. They banned hunting back in 1977, and their wildlife numbers have declined by almost 70% since then. And we know there's a lot of corruption and all kinds of different issues that are going on in Kenya, but still, I mean, that's pretty darn stark.
Oh, that's absolutely, it's very stark. Or look at far more recently than that is Botswana.
Absolutely.
Botswana banned elephants, and then they were almost in existence, and they said, geez, I guess we screwed up. Maybe we need to change this a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
And then in a very short period of time, Botswana's elephant herds are great again.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
It's really challenging. There one of these bills just recently sailed through Congress. And I apologize, I don't have the number here in front of me. So if it kind of sailed through Congress, how is it, what are the chances of it failing?
Well, I think you're talking about the importation ban.
Right, yes.
Yeah, for elephants and lions from Tanzania, Zimbabwe, and Zambia. And that has been in the House bill, but it's been in the House for quite a while now. But let me explain, because I'm a creature of, I started working in the House of Representatives, and the Senate, of course, is the greatest deliberative body, and we all kind of curse the Senate when they don't get anything done. At the same time, in times like this, when the House of Representatives has passed this bill over and over again, and the Senate refuses to take it up, this is when we love the Senate, right? Because the Senate says, no, that's too controversial, and we don't have 60 senators who support it, so it's not going to happen. So the House is run by the majority. So right now the Democrats are in the majority in the House, and whatever they say basically goes. The majority rules. In the Senate, the minority has much, much more power. And because it essentially takes, to block a filibuster, it takes 60 votes in the Senate. You have to have 60 senators agree. If you don't, the other route you can go in the Senate is you can have unanimous consent, which of course means they all have to agree, or you can have votes on some budget matters that only require a simple majority. So sometimes you'll see, and this has been talked about lately, they're trying to add a bunch of items into a kind of so-called budget bill. So they only have to get a majority and not 2/3 in the Senate. That's how, for your listeners, that's how Obamacare ended up passing, was through a budget reconciliation bill, which is why they had to get the majority and not 60 votes. So anyway, long story longer. So the House tends to go, on, it goes to the left and then to the right. After November, we'll probably see the Republicans win the House, and then it'll go far to the right, and the pendulum kind of swings back and forth, whereas the Senate stays more in the middle, just because you really do have to have consensus in the Senate to get anything done. So the good news about this is anytime the Democrats are in power, it's very likely that we are going to see an import ban be passed in one of the bills in the House of Representatives. And in this case, it was in a funding bill. And all it did was it limited funding so that the Fish and Wildlife Service could not process those importation permits. So that's how they did it, is they attached it to an annual spending bill. So we'll see this every time, probably, that the Democrats are in control. But we'll also see the Senate is going to continue to be split. It's going to continue, whoever has the majority will have a slight majority. So it's unlikely that we'll see this getting through the Senate anytime soon.
We can only pray.
And that's part of my job, is to make sure that doesn't happen. And then in the meantime, we have a lot of different strategies that we're using to try to do more education on Capitol Hill about this issue. And I'll give you another example, Ken. In the past, what had happened when this issue, Trump tweeted about elephants, right? And this issue just kind of blew up. And no one wanted to talk about it for a while. They were too afraid to talk about it. And now I think we've seen some of the things that have happened as a result in Africa. And I feel like now a lot of the hunting and conservation groups realize we have to talk about it. We have no choice. We have to fight back. We have to let people know what the facts are. And so whereas in the past we've seen only groups like Dallas Safari Club or like SCI fighting this language, now we have multiple domestic groups that are basically focused on, North American wildlife, that are also understanding the importance of this and understanding that they need to oppose this, because once it happens in Africa, it's coming to the States, right? It's incrementalism, and the extremists will just take more and more bites at the apple. So if you don't stop it at its source, it's just going to continue coming writ large.
Yeah, absolutely it is. What sort of bills are you working on right now, both to support and oppose?
Yeah, absolutely. Of course, the number one is this, the import ban, which just made it through the House of Representatives. Now we're in August recess, so Congress is out for about 4 weeks. So I've met with the Senate, asking them to please not include this in the final version of the bill. And then the next one I'll talk about that's important, which you may have already heard of, is this was the Return Our Constitutional Rights Act, HR 8167. And this bill would repeal the Pittman-Robertson excise tax on firearms and ammunition that we have right now. So it would essentially get rid of all of that funding that we get from Pittman-Robertson that goes to states to manage wildlife and conservation, which would have just an enormous negative impact on wildlife conservation in the United States. So that's something we've also been working on and opposing. But then there are other bills that we support. For example, there is a recent research bill that would increase research on chronic wasting disease, for example, which we obviously need, more information about chronic wasting disease. And we've even supported some bills that are trying to improve domestic forest management on our public lands to have, we have all these devastating wildfires in the West, and it's not good habitat for our North American wildlife. So we're supporting a lot of different domestic type bills that would help benefit wildlife habitat and wildlife conservation.
Look, the Pittsman-Robertson Act is kind of interesting because, as you well know, 11% of every penny that I sell goes there. Mm-hmm. And we write some pretty damn big checks.
I'm sure you do.
Well, that's the other thing that nobody recognizes. These state parks are funded through that, yet the people that use the state parks are often not hunters or are people that they're just people. They want to go camping, they want to go hiking, whatever it is, and they have no idea that it's this industry that funds the use of those parks. So I always shake my head and go, just a second. You're bitching and complaining about hunting or firearms or whatever, or archery, yet the pleasure you derive from this park is solely because of that.
Right, absolutely. And what a lot of fish and game agencies have done in some states is something as easy as a little sign that says, this park was brought to you by $100. Those type of things really make a huge difference. But for the most part, we've done a very poor job of communicating that to people.
Well, I think we've done a poor job communicating a lot of things to a lot of people. And it's one of the reasons that actually I've become myself personally, Remington, a huge supporter of DSC, because I think that they're one of the few organizations that truly do support conservation. I think some of them talk about it, but I think most of the wildlife companies do support them, but DSC, I think, more so than anything. So, kind of what are your thoughts on working for DSC? This is a new role for you. My understanding is you spent many years with the NRA. Is that accurate?
That's accurate. And I was on and off Capitol Hill numerous times as well. I really, really enjoy working for DSC. There is a different energy about Dallas Safari Club and a very positive can-do energy. And I think with a lot of the older hunting groups, and I'm not trying to criticize anybody here, but it's kind of the same old thing. And I feel like Dallas Safari Club, we're very forward looking. We're trying to, change with the times and continue to make ourselves relevant and learn how, the right ways to communicate those things. And like you said, what is so exciting to me is that we really put our money where our mouth is. I mean, the DSC Foundation does a ton of work in Africa on anti-poaching and filling the gaps where there's funding that's needed that other organizations can't fund for whatever reason. But the majority of the foundation dollars are actually spent here in the domestic United States, which a lot of people don't know either. So we do a lot of amazing work. And I've just had a great time working for DSC.
A lot of the funding is spent here in the United States. Are you talking from the
foundation?
From the foundation and government affairs and things like that? Because I also know that the DSC, at least from the outsider looking in, I think that they have some challenging things in that they've been such a Dallas Safari Club. Safari is synonymous with Africa, and they're international. And I think they're getting a lot of push domestically to do more domestically.
Mm-hmm. I think that's just a misunderstanding of what Dallas Safari Club does. Because, like I said, the majority of the foundation dollars are actually spent here in America. And we do spend a lot abroad, but we're one of the few. As you know, when it comes to international hunting, there's Dallas Safari Club and Safari Club International. And so we are very necessary in the international space. And, we work with SCI on these issues because at the end of the day, we're a minority worldwide and we're a minority in Washington, D.C. But the other thing I will mention is that there are a lot of different hunting groups and they all serve a role. And so it's fun to all work together kind of towards the greater good, because there are some things that other organizations can do that we cannot do, but there are also things that DSC does really well, and we're going to continue to do those and expand on them. So everybody is necessary, and kind of these, inner fighting between a lot of the different hunting organizations is no good. What we have, 4% of Americans are hunters, I think, in the United States. It might be a little more than that. But in any event, we really need to stick together because overall we're a minority. And if we don't work hard, we're going to lose, the privilege to hunt at some point in time.
Well, I think in the last couple of years since the beginning of COVID, I think that our numbers have grown. And I think that, I shouldn't say I think, there's no question about it, our numbers have grown.
Yes.
And they have, because people are, along with their fuel prices, are concerned with, where are they going to get their next meal if something happens. So I think that that's a real positive thing. I think the other thing that's happened is the younger generation is really keen on farm to table, fresh, tell me
knowing
something
where their food came
exactly.
from. Yeah.
And all these, the groups, the wildlife, not the wildlife groups, but the anti-hunting groups, the animal groups, I'd love to see them go into a chicken slaughterhouse sometime. They should be happy that the way we do things as opposed to that.
Right. Completely agree. And there is kind of this new generation of just kind of open-mindedness about food in general and discussing food. So if we can connect it that way, it makes a huge difference.
Yeah, my next guess is a guy, Jesse Griffiths is his name, and he's a chef, but he is truly field to table. And so it's going to be interesting. I haven't talked to him yet, but it'll be really interesting to hear what his thoughts are. A couple of things left. I'm going to kind of wrap it up, but tell me in, 10,000 words or less, maybe I'll wrap it up faster than that. What exactly is your role at DSC? I mean, what does government affairs entails?
Sure.
As director, what exactly do you do?
Sure. First, I'm the person in Washington, D.C. that is the Dallas Safari Club contact and lobbyist. So what I do is I introduce myself to everybody on Capitol Hill, basically, and say, I'm Erica. If you need any information, whatever you need, whatever legislative issue that comes up having to deal with wildlife or hunting, I'm your girl. So let me know what you need and how I can help you. So that's kind of how it starts. Then we get into lobbying against certain bills and for other bills, or within the administration needing to meet with the Fish and Wildlife Service, for example, on certain issues. So I'm the key person that is doing all of that. And then in between that, always monitoring hearings on Capitol Hill, bills that are introduced, even statements that are made, news articles, anything that would involve hunting or wildlife. I'm basically on it and making sure that it's not negative. If it is, how can we fix it? Those type of things. And sometimes it's just me, but the majority of the time I work with a lot of other organizations, with Congressional Sportsmen's Foundation, a lot of different, domestic organizations, so that we have more power in numbers that way. I work with the executive branch and also work with Congress, but the majority of my time is spent working with Congress.
So, all that being said, how can the average hunter engage and support your efforts? Because frankly, I think if whatever that percentage is, if we don't try to support however we can, I think that your job becomes far more difficult, which also means the chance of success deteriorates.
100%. We have so much voter apathy from hunters. It's amazing to me. And this is not really true of Dallas Safari Club members, because I feel like they are pretty tuned in to politics for the most part. But I will meet people who hunt who don't vote, and it is crazy to me. And they're passionate about hunting, and they don't even think that it's a political issue, and it is. So that's a huge problem. So number one, be sure you vote. And then number two, I would say join Dallas Safari Club, because we will keep you up to date on what you need to do, when you need to contact your representatives or senators and that type of thing, so that you know. And maybe DSC isn't your organization, join some organization that will keep you updated on politics in DC. So, because no normal human being has time to monitor what's going on in Congress, right? And so that's why that's my job. So then I can let you know when you need to call your elected official. And remember that they work for you. The politicians work for you, not the other way around. So we need to hold them accountable.
What a pleasant thought that is. Truly it is. Look, I hope that we're able to do it. I hope that more and more people will get on board. Whether it's joining Dallas Safari Club, or it could be Wild Sheep Foundation. It doesn't matter, but but they have to have their voice heard.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Erica, I've got nothing more here. I've enjoyed the conversation. It's been great. I've learned a lot myself. I'm still dubious, not about you, but politicians in general. I've seen such a change, and I just hope that we can get the support that's needed. Not to, I would hate to say to save our way of life, because it's more than that, to save the, really, if I look at international, to save some of these African communities, to save the animals, so that we can see the numbers. I mean, just looking at the numbers that was I just saw recently of the population from, I think, 1900 until today, where there was almost no ducks, and today there's, some ludicrous number of ducks, where there was very few elk, antelope, everything. And today's numbers are just so much higher. A friend of mine that Mark Haldane, that has Mark, that when he first got his concession, it had under 2,000 Cape buffalo, and today he's got 25,000 Cape buffalo. Yeah. I mean, things like that. And, we just have to let more and more and more people know. And if we don't have the support of the government, and they pass this stupid regulation that doesn't allow importation of some of these, it will really have a devastating effect on these communities.
Well, Ken, I'll just leave you with this. We had recently a DSC board member who had not been to Washington, D.C., came to D.C., and I said, please come out and I'll set up some meetings for you. And, he just said it was so eye-opening, because you don't realize what's going on in D.C. And I understand why people want to ignore it and pretend like it doesn't exist. But, ignore D.C. at your peril, because they really are doing things every day that will impact all of our lives.
Well, so that D.C. Board member, I'm pretty confident, is one of my best friends.
Well, he's a great guy, but
that's your opinion. I feel differently.
Yes,
but,
yeah. but I think it's so important that people understand what's going on in DC, because they're making laws and policies with or without us. So you can either influence them, or they will, make decisions with you out of the room.
Well, yeah, I understand that, but one of the unfortunate things is they slide things through sometimes. Like you mentioned earlier, they slide these things through on a budgetary thing. Well, who even knows that?
Yeah. Well, that's why you hire someone like me who knows when that's going to happen, or, I get word that it's going to happen. And you can't always stop it from happening, but you can put the alert out there, and you can prevent the next step from happening in the legislative process.
Exactly. I'm going to wind it down. I really appreciate you taking the time. It's been a great conversation. I really enjoy it.
Thank you very much for having me. It was a pleasure.
Appreciate your time. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.